back to the locker room. I'm your host, Will Kronsberg, joined today by special guest Kendall Smith, and you can kind of feel it in the air. It's March, and it's time for March Madness. So Kendall, obviously, we didn't have March Madness last year. It was canceled because of COVID-19, and it's going to feel a little bit different this year. What differences do you foresee with the bubble format?
Well, obviously, there's going to be a lot of differences this year with both men's and women's March Madness tournaments. I just have to say, first and foremost, I am so excited that March Madness is back. I feel like that was the first kind of domino to fall. I mean, obviously, you had conference tournaments during the start of COVID last year that were canceled, but then when March Madness was canceled, it was really like, oh my goodness, I can't believe this is actually happening. So a year later, the fact that it's back is good. The bubble's definitely going to be interesting. You've got the women in Texas, the men in Indiana. It's not going to be the same as having them spread out all across the country, but regardless, I think just the fact that they're playing means the most to these fans. So even though it's going to be a little bit weird, I think we've gotten kind of accustomed to that over this past year, and we're still going to see a national champion crowned for both of these tournaments at the end of the year, which is all you can ask for.
Absolutely. I love that. I had a lot of fun filling out my bracket this year. I just kind of got that excitement welling up inside of me. You mentioned that the men are in Indianapolis, the women are in Texas. The dates have shifted around a little bit. Normally we would have had 2 of the first 4 games last night, 2 more tonight. Those will be moved to tomorrow and Friday, and then we'll see the rest of the first round get underway Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. But it'll be a lot of fun. Let's talk particularly about that men's bracket and looking at some of the possible upsets. Everybody loves a 12-5 or maybe even 11 over a 6. So tell me about some of the upsets that you see in your bracket.
Well, first and foremost, I know people might say I'm biased because some people know that my brother plays baseball at Winthrop University, but I have to say I think the Winthrop Eagles are going to upset the number 5 seeded Villanova Wildcats. I mean, I just have to tell you, I think Winthrop is such a complete team this year. They might be in the Big South. They're a mid-major school, but the program that Pat Kelsey runs, I mean, it is just such a hardcore, clean, concise program. I love the way they play basketball. I'm really confident in Winthrop. I actually have them going to the Sweet 16 and taking down Purdue in the round of 32. So that's the one major upset for me where I'm like, I definitely think Winthrop has the upper hand in this game, even though they're a 12 seed. And really, they're only a 12 seed because they come out of the Big South. You typically see those mid-major schools not really getting much higher of a seed than that, but I do think they have a really great chance to take down Villanova and, like I said, even Purdue in that round of 32.
I mean, I really like Winthrop. That's a strong team coming out of the Big South. You mentioned they have Villanova in the first round. Villanova was really strong for much of the season, ranked 3rd in that early portion. They've fallen behind with their star Colin Gillespie getting injured the past couple weeks, and then obviously falling to Georgetown in the Big East tournament at Madison Square Garden last week. I think Villanova's kind of weak. And another team that I see kind of in that same category is Michigan, a 1 seed who's lost one of their stars, Isaiah Livers. They'll probably fall, in my book, in either the 2nd or the 3rd round against either an 8 seed or a 4 seed, which I think will be LSU or Florida State. Now, obviously, Michigan comes from the Big Ten. That's a very strong conference. Without getting into your Final Four, can you let me know a little bit about how you see some of that middle part of the Big Ten or some of those non-1-seeded teams faring in the tournament?
Well, it's going to be hard not to get into my Final Four and mention Big Ten in the same sentence because I'll just go ahead and give a little spoiler alert here. 3 out of my 4 Final Four teams are from the Big Ten Conference. So obviously you have a plethora of teams from the Big Ten in this NCAA tournament. You obviously have Ohio State, you have Michigan, you have Iowa, you have Illinois, amongst others. I know you and I talked about it before we started the show, and you kind of see Michigan maybe falling out a little bit earlier on than I do. Look, the Big Ten is a strong conference. I'm going to make the argument that they're the strongest conference in college basketball right now. So I foresee them doing well, obviously well enough to where 3 out of the 4 teams in my Final Four are from the Big Ten, and I see Michigan being one of those teams. Not so much maybe Ohio State, like I said, not Purdue, but Michigan, Iowa, Illinois. Those are the teams for me in the Big Ten that I think are really going to contend for that title this year.
I have to agree on the Big Ten being the strongest conference this year. I think the ACC has held that role for the majority of the past decade or so. But they're not really there as much this year. You saw Virginia kind of fall back towards the end. Louisville just missed the tournament. Duke missed the tournament for the first time in decades. North Carolina kind of scraped in. But one ACC team that I think is actually hot right now, has a chance for a little bit of a pseudo upset, we'll say, is Georgia Tech. They just won the ACC tournament. They're seeded 9th. and they have a first-round matchup against Loyola Chicago, who was kind of the Cinderella story a few years back. But I think Georgia Tech takes that game. They're definitely the strongest team coming out of the Atlantic Coast right now. I do want to shift to your Final Four and get a sense of how strong that Big Ten could be. So first, tell me, the number 1 overall seed Gonzaga, do we have them in the Final Four?
I don't have Gonzaga in the Final Four. I've always been really hesitant about Gonzaga, and this might just be based off of previous experiences and watching them. Number 1, I'm a little bit biased because Indiana, I'm a big IU Hoosiers fan. They were the last team to ever go undefeated, have a complete undefeated season in college basketball. Gonzaga is on track to do that this year if they do win the NCAA tournament, but I don't have them in the Final Four for the sake of the fact that I don't think they had the strength of schedule this year compared to some of these other teams. I don't think they're going to match up particularly well against some of these other Power 5 school teams. So I don't have them in the Final Four. Like I said, 3 Big Ten teams. That other team is Baylor. I think Baylor is incredibly hot right now. I think they have an opportunity to win. My brother actually has them as his winners. I have Iowa actually winning it all, which I know it's a little bit of a hot take, but I was telling somebody earlier, I like to have these hot takes in my bracket because I feel like if you kind of go out on a limb a little bit and you're right, that's a really big deal. So I've got Illinois and Iowa in the championship game. I think Illinois is a great team. Paul Biancardi, the national director of recruiting for ESPN, actually has Illinois winning it all. But those are my Final Four teams. I know a lot of people talking about Alabama, talking about Texas. Some people might disagree on my Gonzaga choice, but I'm really riding with the Big Ten this year and kind of putting all of my eggs in that basket, if you will.
Iowa is a good team. They have probably the best individual player in college basketball this year in Luka Garza. I just don't know if a conference can carry 3 teams to the Final Four, have what's basically a conference matchup in the national championship game. So I'm going to give you my Final Four. It's Gonzaga. They're undefeated. They are arguably the strongest team we've seen in college basketball in years. It's been just as long since a team went undefeated for a full season, Indiana, as it has been since Duke missed the tournament. So it's been quite a long time. But I like Gonzaga. I like Baylor, Illinois, and I like Alabama. I think Alabama is definitely the strongest team in the East because of Michigan's injury. I see them getting kind of an easy path to the Final Four, though they'll kind of hit a brick wall there with 3 of the strongest teams we've seen this season, Gonzaga, Baylor, and Illinois. Shifting gears to the women, obviously we can't not mention the fact that University of South Carolina once again has a very strong women's team. We were probably the favorites in the tournament last year before it got canceled, but this year we still slot in as a 1 seed. We've played 2 of the other 3 1 seeds already in NC State and UConn. We lost those games sadly, but can we at least get to the Final Four before we have to face them?
I think that we will make it to the Final Four, but I think it's a little bit dicey. Look, I think the confidence of our women's team is up a lot right now, especially after that SEC tournament victory. But I think some of these other teams, and this is really hard for me to say, I think some of these other teams like UConn, like NC State, have a bit of an upper hand on South Carolina as of right now. South Carolina has the capacity, they have the players, they have the talent, they have the ability to make it to the Final Four and even win a national championship. But it's all about them really stepping up to the plate in these games. And you know, it's really hard to beat a good team twice in one season. We've seen that a lot. So if they are matched up against UConn or NC State down the line, it's going to be actually a little bit harder, I think, for UConn and NC State to take that victory over South Carolina, given it is a little bit harder to beat a good team twice. So I think there's a good chance they make the Final Four. Will they win it all? I am not sure. A lot of people speculating on that because of the amount of losses we've had this season, but we'll have to see how it goes.
When you think women's basketball, you have to think UConn. They've won 10 of the last 20 tournaments. It's been 4 years, so for the first time in 20 years, they have a senior class that hasn't experienced cutting down the nets, and I think they're really excited to get back to that. They have freshman Paige Beckers, who's just a sensational young player, and if South Carolina does get to the Final Four, getting past Maryland in the Elite Eight, I think it's definitely going to be a tough path, especially without their only senior, Lily Grissett, who's out with a lower leg injury, sort of the off-the-court leader of the team. But they start their tournament path against Mercer this weekend, and I'm really excited to see where they go. Other than that, it's going to do it for us on The Locker Room. For Kendall Smith, I'm Will Kronsberg. Thank you so much for watching.